I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes! Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to those of you listening on the internet, wherever or whenever you may be. My name is Joe DeMare, and this is For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment. We talk about them in the way they affect you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the happiness of your friends and neighbors and your pets and your children, because the environment does affect everybody. This is the one topic that all of us should be able to agree on and do something about it. In fact, most of us do agree. In poll after poll, everybody says they want to protect the environment. Everybody says they want to cut greenhouse gas emissions. Well, I shouldn't say everybody. There's a 10 to 15% obnoxious minority that just say, no, it's more pollution, yay. But almost everybody agrees on this across the political spectrum. And we just have to get together across the political spectrum to make this happen. And that's why I'm doing this show. And this show, of course, usually I do it from the studio. And usually we have all the resources of the studio, not the least of which is the ability to have my co-host, Rebecca Wood, on with me for the entire show. Rebecca's going to be calling in a little later for you Rebecca fans. The resources that the full station has are just awesome. I mean, sometimes there have been a couple times when I got up a little late and I wasn't going to make it into the show in time, make it into the studio in time. So they just send out the helicopter. They've got the helicopter pad there on top of the building, and they'll send the pilot out. My backyard's big enough I can hop in the helicopter, and as you're winging your way back to the studio in Toledo and you're looking out over northwest Ohio, it's so flat here you can see for miles and miles. You can see the lake once you get up in the helicopter. It just really gives you that feeling you're about to do something fantastic. So not able to recreate that in my living room, which is where I'm doing the show from. So I'm dressed up. I've got a nice suit on and a nice tie. And those of you who look at the YouTube version, I'll show I set a different picture every week of what I'm dressed up in. And those of you who have been looking at the YouTube may have noticed that I actually haven't managed to get a haircut since the whole start of this COVID thing. And it's actually reached the point where my wife has offered to cut my hair. So that should be happening a little later today. So for those of you who've been getting increasingly worried about me by looking at the hair on the YouTube version, don't worry. Sanity is coming back to my hair very shortly. So, great show lined up for you today. Unfortunately, the guest that we had lined up, Dawn Chapman, she sent me an email at about 6 o'clock this morning. One of her children is having some medical issues and she can't do the show. So, but we do have an old friend, Leatra Harper. She'll be calling in at 8:45 with some good news. And we have, in fact, in the news segment of the show, this is the first, we have count them, 5 news stories to go over, and all 5 of them are good news. I think this is the first time since we started this show that it's been nothing but good news for the environment. It's really kind of amazing. So that's something to look forward to. And of course, Rebecca's going to be calling back in. And before that, at the bottom of the hour, we're going to hear from our wonderful, wonderful sponsors. And as always, our letter from the future. And hopefully we'll be hearing from you at 866-240-1065. That's 866-240-1065. This is a call-in show, and this is the best show in Ohio, but it gets better every time you call. And of course, on a show where my guest canceled just an hour and a half before the program, I would really appreciate a call. And I know you folks are out there listening, and I know you've got interesting and good things to say and good questions to ask about the environment and ecology, because whenever we offer a prize, someone calls in within a minute and claims it. So it's great that people are willing to call in when I offer a prize, but this is a call-in show, and this is one of the reasons I did this show, was so I could talk to people all over Northwest Ohio about environmental issues. And so don't hesitate to call in if you hear anything on the show that interests you, or if you've had any kind of environmental question or ecological question or nature question. We will do our best to answer it. And one interesting thing that happened this past week in terms of nature and so forth is the Comet Neowise. I don't know if you folks have heard of the Comet Neowise. Probably you have, but it's a great comet that's visible right now. It comes around once every 6,800 years. And my wife and I have been trying to see it. In fact, we made 3 attempts to see the Comet Neowise, and we got in the van and we drove out until we found a practically deserted road that had a nice big field on the north side of the road so that we could look to the northwest to see the comet. And the first 2 tries were failures. We did not see the comet at all. But I wanted to point out that when you're going out into nature, when you're going out into the woods or out into the night sky, somewhere where there aren't any artificial lights and you can really see the sky, even though it was a quote-unquote failure, we didn't see the comet the first 2 times. It was great. It was a great experience. I mean, it was so nice to just be out there away from the sounds of the city. We live in Bowling Green, and away from traffic noise. And, there were tens of thousands of fireflies within the spot that we were at, which was really cool. Didn't see the comet the first couple times, but the first time my wife saw a shooting star, and the second time I saw one, and the one I saw was huge. It was bright green, and it went from one side of the sky to the other. It was really a beautiful shooting star, and managed to see the Milky Way, that is the first time this year I've managed to see the Milky Way. The Milky Way is something that is suffering from light pollution. It's hard for those of us who are a little older to imagine, because most of us who are a little older, I'm 58, we have memories of going camping or going to a lake up in Michigan or going out at night in the woods, and when there wasn't so much artificial light everywhere, and you could look up and you could see the Milky Way. Well, there's an entire generation of people who've never seen the Milky Way now, because it's getting so hard to see because there's so much light pollution. Rebecca and I talked about this in an earlier show, that having the LED lights, which are so inexpensive to run and use so little energy, it's kind of a two-edged sword, in that now that LED lighting is so cheap and so easy, municipalities and businesses and everybody are just putting lights up, street lights up everywhere, and that's not good. We need to see the night sky sometimes. We need to see things like the Milky Way or a passing comet. And because it sort of humbles you a little bit. You're looking up into that sky. You're looking up. We know that we're looking up millions and millions of light years off into the distance, and it really kind of humbles you a little bit and makes you appreciate our place in the cosmos, which is a really, really tiny place. We're living literally on a speck, and you don't really get that sense unless you can go out and occasionally see something that awes you, some natural thing that awes you. And on our third attempt, we did manage to see the comet, and it was beautiful. It was really long tail. It didn't look like all these pictures that people are putting up on social media, because those pictures are being taken with cameras with really long exposures. And if you do that, then you can get colors and you can get details. We just had our eyes and a pair of binoculars, and there were no colors, but it looked really tenuous. It looked really kind of fragile and ephemeral, but it was really beautiful, and we're really glad that we managed to see this comet. The last comet I saw, it was about 20 years ago. It was a bigger comet. It was, but again, had to go out in the country, out into nature, and that is half the experience. So Comet Neowise is still around for a few more days, and if you haven't seen it yet, I'd recommend seeing it. It's pretty much straight to the northwest, and you go and you look right after sunset, and it's kind of dim. It's one of those things where you could see it a little better if you don't look directly at it, because your eyes don't have those dim light receptors right in the center. That's all color and light receptors. So go out, I recommend it. And even if you don't manage to see it, even if it's cloudy or whatever, just enjoy the experience. It's an excuse. It's an excuse to get out of your little artificial cocoon there that most of us are wrapped in most of the time. Okay, so now is the point in the show where we would normally be welcoming our guest, Dawn Chapman. She is a parent. She has 2 children, and she's a member of something called Moms Only for St. Louis. She's been fighting this dump in Bridgeton, Missouri, and it's called. There's 2 dumps right next to each other. One is called the Bridgeton landfill, which is an active dump. They're still dumping trash in there, and the other is the Westlake landfill. Now, the Westlake landfill, way back in the 1940s during the Manhattan Project, there was a company in St. Louis, Missouri that was hired to get radioactive material to make the first atomic bomb. This is Manhattan Project waste, and there's places all over the country that have these Manhattan Project wastes, going on 80 years now. Western New York, Niagara Falls has a big Manhattan waste repository. This place near St. Louis, Bridgeton, Missouri, Oak Ridge, basically when they were making the atomic bomb, they contracted out with chemical companies all over the country to try to get this radioactive material, the uranium and the plutonium, in order to make the first 2 atomic bombs, Fat Man and Little Boy, that were used on Japan. And this past week was the 75th anniversary of the Trinity nuclear explosion, and that was the very first nuclear explosion ever in human history. It was followed by hundreds more as we kept testing our nuclear weapons. And of course the first bomb was just a cute little fission bomb, which only has tens or hundreds of kilotons of power, and then we used that to develop the fusion bomb or the hydrogen bomb, and that has hundreds and hundreds of megatons of explosive power. But that first explosion 75 years ago, the wastes and the fallout, the literal fallout, and the physical fallout and the environmental fallout from that bomb is still going. And what happened over in Bridgeton is they at the Westlake landfill was that they had this radioactive stuff left over from leaching out the uranium from sands and other materials that it was embedded in, and it was radioactive. It was dangerous, but all they did was they mixed it with regular dirt. And here's that fallacy that we environmentalists are fighting over and over again, the idea that the solution to pollution is dilution. When I hear somebody say that, I'm a nonviolent person. Okay, I'm a member of the Green Party, and one of our 10 key principles is nonviolence. But when I hear somebody say that, I get an urge to smack them. I get an urge to just be like, up the side of the head, what are you thinking? Because there is no dilution for the planet. You know, we have this one planet, and it's a finite size, and it's just so big. And however much radioactive waste you produce is going to be there on this planet. And the idea that you can somehow dilute it so that it to the point where it almost no longer exists, that is just sheer folly and sheer fantasy. But this was back in the 1940s, before we had a lot of knowledge of the biosphere, a lot of knowledge of how food transport and nutrient transport works in ecology. So I guess they can be forgiven for this, but they mixed all this radioactive waste with regular dirt, and they used it to cap off this landfill, which had been a quarry. It had been a limestone quarry. They'd filled it with trash, and then they covered it up with this radioactive dirt. So then in 2010, something happened. A fire started in the landfill. A fire started inside the dump, an underground fire. It's been going since 2010, for 10 years, and it's predicted it's going to keep burning until at least 2024, so another 14 or 15 years. And what happened is this is 60 to 150 feet under the ground, and so it's heating up the whole area, and occasionally the fire breaks out onto the surface. And so for all these years, since 2010, periodically there's been smoke, there's been haze, and these radioactive materials mixed in with other toxic chemicals from the dump have just been seeping out into the neighborhood. And for decades, or for the whole decade there, the people who lived there have been saying, that's making us sick. And the state of Missouri kept reassuring them, oh, no, the levels aren't high enough. You couldn't possibly be getting sick from this. And then just recently, they finally admitted, oh, yeah, well, okay, there was barium sulfate and uranium and thorium in that smoke. All right, you did get sick because of what was going on with that. But, of course, being the state of Missouri, as so often happens, they follow that up with, but now everything's fine. But now you're not being harmed by the emissions that are happening now. You were just harmed by those old ones in the past. So still, we don't have to do anything about this. This, if you're an environmentalist, you hear this story over and over and over again. The officials, the state government, the local governments, covering up for the businesses that are there because there's still an active landfill there. It's run by Republic, and it's an employer. They've got money, and they influence the local politicians who just want to keep that business happy, and they're more often than not, willing to sacrifice the local residents in order to keep the money flowing. But then eventually things happen that eventually force their hand, but they still maintain that rear guard. They're still making the claim, oh, but the emissions now are okay. That happens over and over again. But some of the things that have happened since then that have proven the state of Missouri wrong and proven residents like Don Chapman right are they actually went and did some studies and they found levels of toxins that are too high. And Republic, the owner of this dump, has spent $200 million on this, how to describe it, on this big project that sort of reduces the severity of the fires. Basically, they stick a bunch of pipes down into the landfill, and they send cooling water down in there, and they circulate it, and the cooling water, and then they put it out through chillers to dissipate the heat. So the cooling water keeps the fire from erupting constantly. It lowers the amount of smoke and everything coming out of the ground, but it doesn't stop the fire. This fire is good. There's no way to get in there and stop it. The only way you could really get in there and stop it would be if you dig down, unearth everything, and drench it in water. Then you could stop the fire. But that's not going to happen because that also causes tons of environmental issues. Spraying water into a burning dump causes leaching into the groundwater that can have, really long-term effects. There's no way to clean that up. So anyway, this barium sulfate, this uranium, this thorium has been poisoning the local residents of Bridgeton, Missouri for a decade now. And another thing that happened that made the state finally admit, okay, yeah, there's some damage, is that Republic has been sued several times and has paid out millions in damages. As often happens, those payouts are accompanied by non-disclosure agreements, so we don't actually have the details, but we can tell because they lost the lawsuits that it was proven in court that they are damaging the people and damaging the environment. So this is an ongoing controversy, and one of the reasons I wanted to have Dawn on was because we, Ohio, with House Bill 104, we're considering bringing a radioactive waste dump, perhaps multiple radioactive waste dumps, into our state. We're considering doing to ourselves what was done to Bridgeton, Missouri, with House Bill 104. And the House Bill 104, we've been reporting on it. It's terrible. I'm not going to go into a lot of details on it again, but just in short, it's a bill to turn Ohio into a radioactive waste dump. It creates an authority, quote unquote, an authority that is empowered to bring radioactive wastes into Ohio, whether or not the people of Ohio want it, and even whether or not the governor wants it. It actually gives this authority, quote unquote, more authority than whatever governor. I guess DeWine maybe stuck that in there in case he loses the next election. He wants to make sure that even if there's a more environmentally friendly governor in, this can still happen. So it's terrible, and we should not be considering doing to ourselves what was done to the people of Bridgeton. And just today's example where she had to beg off at the last minute because her child is having health problems. When you expose people to pollutants like uranium and thorium and barium, and not to mention the sulfur compounds, just the regular old sulfur compounds that are in a burning trash dump, when you expose people to general things like that, they get sick, and it's not always predictable. There's some things like if you have radioactive iodine, that affects your thyroid. Okay, that's pretty straightforward and clear. But if you're being exposed to something like uranium or barium sulfate, it can manifest in a whole bunch of different ways. So it's not something that you want to have happen. Diane D'Arrigo's calling, our good friend from NEARS. She's got an issue that's coming up. So while we're waiting for her call, it's time to hear from our sponsors. Okay, For Agreed Future is brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, they provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They restore wildlife habitats and lead outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy, from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. There's several ways you can contact them. One is to call at 419-353-1897. That's 419-353-1897. You can go to their website, which is wcparks.org, and also look them up on Facebook. Just search for Wood County Parks on Facebook. And finally, they've got this cool app, which I like to use, and you just go to the App Store and search for WC Parks. And using that app, you can stay updated on everything the park district's doing, and have post some pictures of what fun stuff you're doing in the Wood County Parks, and just basically have a great time. All right. Speaking of having a great time, Diane D'Arrigo has joined us. Diane, welcome once again to For a Green Future.
Thank you so much. So I'm Diane D'Arrigo with Nuclear Information and Resource Service, and as I understand it, you just want a quick announcement. You don't want a big explanation.
Right. Yep, that would be good.
Okay.
Diane was contacted yesterday. She's involved in in a very timely little effort to stop the Trump administration from doing yet another terrible environmental thing. So go ahead, Diane, take it from here.
Okay. Back in 1986 to 1992 time range, the state of Ohio adopted passed a law that requires nuclear waste, man-made nuclear waste in the state of Ohio to be considered and treated like nuclear waste, even if the federal government deregulates it and pretends it's not radioactive. Back in those days, the effort by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission was called below regulatory concern, and the idea was that some amount of nuclear waste, and mainly it's nuclear power waste, over 90% nuclear power waste, even into the 99%. At that time, they were proposing that a quarter to a third of the radioactive waste from nuclear power be considered below concern. Regular garbage, recycling, incineration, hazardous waste, reuse of equipment, even though contaminated, just a little contaminated, but never enforced about how much it was. We were able to, the movement across this country, got the Congress to overturn the provision of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for this below regulatory concern thing. Part of the way that we were able to get Congress to do it is Ohio and 14 other states passed laws that said you have to continue to regulate and take this waste seriously, consider it radioactive in our state. So Maine, Vermont, Connecticut, Ohio, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Iowa, Minnesota, Oregon, Texas, New Mexico, Illinois, South Dakota, Colorado passed regulations and laws about it, and Oklahoma, Georgia, and Virginia passed resolutions. And now, so that was back 1992, there have been many efforts since then by the different federal agencies and even some state ones to deregulate the waste. We've pretty much been able to stop most of them, but now the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is coming at it again, and they've renamed the waste as very low level, which is the very largest lie, because it actually wouldn't be a quarter to a third of the waste. It would be all of the waste except the irradiated nuclear fuel. So this VLLW policy is up for public comment until tomorrow. And I have a legal letter of opposition and comment, and am seeking people, groups, organizations in Ohio to sign on to it, to submit to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission later today or early tomorrow to express our opposition and to potentially provide standing for a challenge. Several lawyers and organizations with lawyers are interested in challenging this because it is such an outrageous attempt. So I am seeking people to join into these comments so that Ohioans will have standing to challenge this bad idea if the Nuclear Regulatory Commission proceeds with it. So to do that,
okay,
I guess I need...
Diane, could you just give us an example of something that's pretty radioactive that is now considered waste that would just be considered regular old garbage if this policy goes through?
Well, entire nuclear reactors would potentially become just rubble and garbage. And when the nuclear power happens in the core of the reactor, the uranium atoms that are concentrated in the fuel rods, they split, and their binding energy heats the water, turns the turbines, and makes electricity. But when they split, they break into other radioactive elements like cesium and strontium and iodines, biologically active, some very long-lasting. If they stay in the rods, they're high-level waste, and we have our problems with isolating and managing that for a long time. But a lot of it leaks out of those rods into that water, and then the water is filtered. So the filters, evaporator bottoms, sludges, and resins from cleaning the water that circulates around the core become, they are considered, quote, low-level, unquote, radioactive waste, and now could potentially be considered very low-level radioactive waste, which is a real lie, because if they're kept in there filtering long enough, you could get a lethal dose in 15 or 20 minutes unshielded from this stuff. And some of the elements, example, iodine-129, it has a half-life of 16 million years. So multiply by 10 or 20, and that's how long it stays radioactively dangerous. So we cannot leave this stuff in regular garbage dumps, because most, if not all, regular garbage dumps or hazardous waste sites leak. And they're not even monitored beyond 30 years. At least the nuclear dumps that are licensed dumps, to which these are supposed to go, have 100 years of institutional control after closure. It's not adequate. They can't fully isolate it. But to deliberately allow it to go into any landfill that applies, what would happen, okay, that's what it would be, a resin from filtering the water is one of the things. The concrete, the base mat, and the dome of the reactor, when the uranium splits, sometimes it forms radioactive gases, and those permeate into the pores of the concrete and then decay into solid radioactive elements, and then you've got radioactive concrete. You can't wipe off the surface. It's permeated within the surface. They say, oh, it's not that much. It's just rubble. That's some of the stuff they really want to just, because it's such a huge volume, send into regular garbage or industrial landfills. And it's sad that there's such huge volumes, but this is part of the cost of nuclear energy. And if we're going to have nuclear energy and nuclear industry is going to make this stuff, they have to be accountable for the waste they generate. They can't externalize it or dump it on the public. And now this is a massive dumping to the public. We would potentially not even know if the landfills that are applying to take it or the other facilities that apply to become exempt and able to take nuclear waste are even applying for it. It's just a terrible, terrible plan.
So I suppose it's possible if this insane policy goes through, you could be making a dump run yourself, like, taking some stuff out of your basement and hauling it up to the dump, and as you're dumping it, there could be something that's intensely radioactive right there that hasn't been buried yet. You could personally get exposed to the radiation from inside a nuclear reactor if it's allowed to be put into regular municipal dumps.
That sounds like a very possible scenario. There's also the scenario of the farm down the pike there is losing money, and maybe they want to apply as an exempt facility, and they're going to apply to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and they might get specific exempt authority to take some portion of that waste, and it could be trucked through your streets to the neighborhood. Not even necessarily a licensed dump, but to the back 40 and dump there, and then get into the drinking water, etc. There are a lot of ways. I mean, the whole point about the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is they're supposed to regulate, and the danger. There's technical, physical dangers from it, and we also have a situation where Ohio, which is often a pretty conservative state, has passed a law saying don't do this in our state. This policy, the way it's written, is designed to get around that state law. So it's really a threat to the democracy that we do have and the state authority that we do have over this material.
All right, Diane.
This waste, this nuclear waste, yeah.
Right. If somebody's listening who's with an environmental organization, or I guess any organization, I mean, you take sign-ons from the local Rotary or whatever,
Sure.
How would they go about doing this?
Well, Joe, what's the most efficient way? The sign-on link to the Google form it's kind of long. It's like about 30 characters, so I don't want to read that on the phone. I don't think that people will get it.
Is it on your website?
Can you post it on your website?
Can I post it on my website? Yeah, I could post it on my website. Sure. Yeah.
I will give you my email address. People can email me.
Okay, good. We'll go with that.
Diane D. DIANED at NIRS, our organization initials, NIRS.org. And I can send to you, so it's Diane D, my first name and my initial, with one N, and Diane D at NIRS.org. And if people can do it today, that would be great. And if they can't do it by today, then we can still add people tomorrow. We can submit, say these names support the comments that were submitted yesterday. As long as they're in by midnight, Monday the 20th, I could also give you the email address to send it to, but that's also long, VLL transfer or something.
Like emailing you is the best, or I'll put this up on our Facebook page. So if people want to go to the For a Green Future Facebook page, they can do that. And
okay, I'm sending it to you right now.
All right. Well, all right. So thanks, Dan, for looking out for Ohio here, and keep up the good fight. And we'll see. We'll stick with this story and see what happens.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye. All right. That was Diane D'Arrigo with an urgent call. If you're somebody who's in an environmental organization or any organization and you don't want nuclear waste brought to Ohio by the federal government, if you don't want the feds dumping nuclear waste on us the way they did to Missouri, the way they did in Bridgeton, that was all a federal project, and they just sacrificed that part of Missouri because, they had to make a bomb. Well, they don't have to dispose of nuclear waste in an irresponsible manner. We have a choice. There's not a war on right now. There's no excuse. We need to protect American citizens from nuclear radiation, and that's what the government should be doing as opposed to dumping it on us. All right. Now, on to news and views. We're going to get a call here shortly from our good friend Leatra Harper. But in the meantime, here's our news and like I say, 5 stories, all good. First one. A few weeks ago, we reported that FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, was considering an appeal from a questionable citizens group that seems to just be a electric industry plant or a fossil fuel industry plant. That's how it appears. But what they wanted was for FERC to get rid of net metering nationwide. And net metering is very simple. It just says if you've got solar panels or a windmill on your house and you put more power into the grid than you're using, you get paid for that electricity. That's net metering. You pay when you take power off the grid, and you get paid when you put power on the grid. It's pretty simple and straightforward and makes a lot of sense. Well, this organization appealed to FERC saying, we shouldn't be paying people for electricity. The utility should get that electricity for free. So FERC, amazingly enough, did the right thing. FERC said, no, we're not going to get rid of net metering. We want more net metering, and we want more solar panels on people's rooftops, and so for once, the right thing happened. So that's great. Another bit of good news, another story that we'd reported on earlier. The Trump administration wanted to open Yellowstone up to trophy hunting. They wanted to kill off the last of the grizzly bears down here in the mainland. And so a whole bunch of organizations appealed this because there's only 700 grizzly bears in the region. And what happened is the Fish and Wildlife Service used really bad data to try to justify this unjustifiable thing. And a federal court struck it down this past week. They said, no, you can't exterminate the last grizzly bears. That violates the Endangered Species Act. And so, I know that Trump's son there, the one who likes to shoot big animals, is terribly, terribly disappointed. But, the idea that 700 bears is a big enough population that you can start shooting them off, killing them, that's crazy. Scientifically speaking, genetically speaking. I mean, just imagine a town of 700 people, and if they're only allowed to breed with each other, pretty soon that town everybody's going to start looking the same. You're going to start getting some genetic problems in that town, and it's the same with bears. You need to have thousands of bears. Then once we've got tens of thousands, then you can start talking about hunting some of them. But when you're down to 700, you don't kill off the last of them. So another bit of good news. All right, and some more good news. We have our caller. Hello. Yeah, hi. Welcome to Forward in the Future.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So some more amazing news this past week about the big project. We've had you on before, but could just remind our listeners a little bit about what was proposed, or what is still proposed. So the project hasn't been abandoned, but there's been this huge development down there in southeastern Ohio. Just remind us what's proposed, and then tell us what happened.
Well, Joe, it's been going on now for about 3 years at least, that kind of behind the scenes, really, in Belmont County, as a result of fracking and all the investment that's been made in trying to get the frack gas to markets that are maybe higher priced markets. And I always say it was kind of a Pandora box when it was open, because then it resulted in pipelines and eminent domain and like Rover and Nexus coming through our area. But it just doesn't stop. So then when we found out about these plans to turn the Ohio River Valley into a petrochemical corridor, just when you thought it can't get any worse, then you find out that it can. And so there's one being built right now in Pennsylvania, in Beaver County. It's a huge, massive complex by Royal Dutch Shell. It takes quite a while to build these massive petrochemical plants to turn ethane into like noodles to make plastic. These are highly polluting facilities. And then for some reason, Ohio ported another ethane cracker plant of similar size in Belmont County on the Ohio River, about 70 miles downstream from the Shell plant. So we've just been trying to do everything we can to get a better, cleaner, more sustainable, diversified economy in that region. But what happened is Ohio courted this company, PPP Global, who had a partner called Dai Lim out of South Korea. PPP Global is out of Thailand. And they have actually incentivized this project, like through Jobs Ohio and some other means. They've been able to, well, Jobs Ohio, we know for sure, has contributed $70 million to this project. We still don't have a final investment. $70 million, yes.
Yeah, so those are our tax dollars. Those are our tax dollars going to companies from Thailand and, was it Korea, did you say?
South Korea. What's kind of opaque about Jobs Ohio is they get their money from liquor sales. I mean, we still get the taxes, but it's a private-public partnership. So it isn't very apparent. It's very hard to find out how they make the decisions, but it was set up by Governor Kasich, kind of put behind the wall for public scrutiny. And we believe it was to promote fracking and to, basically turn Ohio into a shale gas mecca with a lot of shale gas, toxic radioactive fracking waste as a result, and lots of loss of our precious fresh water. So, and now we have this overlay on.
So we're running a little short on time here, Leatra. So what's the good news? What happened this past week?
Well, Daelim, the South Korean partner, pulled out, and we're thinking that is just because the business plan is just not there, and still no final investment decision. A lot of public money has been spent. So we're hoping to be able to just get PTT Global to pull the plug entirely so that we can use the money that's been spent, from Ohioans for Ohioans for something much better, especially in the river valley that really is already compromised.
But it's still a beautiful place, and it's still, we could
beautiful.
Have like world-class tourism, frankly. If you wanted a sustainable industry, we could follow Costa Rica's example, and people would come from miles around to see that part of Ohio. It's really gorgeous.
Oh, plus the Ohio River is a drinking water source for 5 million people, and it's unlike the Gulf, which is being called Cancer Alley or Death Alley as a result of the petrochemical build out there. We certainly can't have that in a valley with air inversions with such a major polluter, and that would compromise the water even further when we have so many opportunities. And, it's called the resource curse, Joe, as you know, but, the people in the valley are finally waking up to the fact that they're being used by these companies from overseas just to take the product and the profit away and leave us with their pollution. So I'm hoping that we can turn this ship. I really do.
So that's some really big news that the South Koreans, even though we're literally shoveling tens of millions of dollars at them, the South Koreans looked at it economically and said, "Hey, this doesn't make any sense," and pulled out. That's happening more and more, Leatra. These big corporations are finally starting to realize that the activities that destroy the environment in the end turn out to be less profitable than the ones that improve it. So just great news. Thanks for sharing it with us.
Oh, you bet. And I'm always glad to share the good news because it really is a David and Goliath fight to try to get away from fossil fuels and get into that greener economy that we need. So this is...
real quick, Leatra, you personally have some good news along that line, right? You just switched your house over to geothermal heating and cooling.
Yes, I love it. It's just so great to get off the gas. I just think, I feel privileged to be able to have the opportunity to do that, with the solar panels and the batteries and now the geothermal. But it's really not hard to do. It's just that, when you're looking for the payback, you might have to wait a while, but it really is worth it. And I'm just so glad we have that technology now to be able to do things like that.
And how comfortable is your house? How comfortable has your house been in this heat wave using geothermal?
Oh, well, you know what? I don't feel so badly about, having the AC run as much as it does now because it's like, it's not just free energy, but it's solar energy that's running it. So, and then when we did have a power outage, we were seamless. I heard generators running, but I didn't know there was a power outage. So, it just kind of seems like finally this dream is coming true and it's workable and it's economical. It does have a payback. So glad we did it.
All right. Well, thanks so much for calling, Leatra.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. And Godspeed. Your work is very important. Thank you.
You too. Thanks. Bye. All right. That was Leatra Harper. Okay. We got Becca on the line. Wow. Just call after call. Okay. Hi, Becca. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm all right. You're way too popular today.
Well, I can handle it, though. I can handle even more. I could handle 10 calls in a show. That would be great.
Wow.
So how are you doing?
Oh, not too bad. I hear it's going to be very, very hot today, and we don't have really great air conditioning here, so... And one of us is permanently trapped in a fur jumpsuit, so a little worried about that, but we're just going to do the best we can.
That's your co-host with the fur, right?
That's him, yeah.
Buildings like yours, big apartment buildings, that is the sort of building which should have geothermal energy because, it's perfectly suited for it. And the idea that we've got to bring in all this electricity to cool everything, air conditioning units are extremely inefficient, but geothermal air cooling systems are extremely efficient because part of what you're doing is taking the heat out of the building, sticking it in the ground, and then you get to draw on that heat in the winter. You literally store up heat from the summer physically to use in the winter time. So we could be going in that direction, and we should be going in it more. So I was in the middle of giving people good environmental news, Rebecca. We're running out of time here, but I just wanted to do a couple more real quick, and then we can talk. Or if something on this, hits you, jump right in with a comment. One is the story we've been following about Ohio State University trying to put in a fracked gas electric generating plant. There was a hearing about that, a procedural hearing on the 14th, and my people at the Sierra Club said it actually went pretty well, that they made some arguments, and it seemed like it was having an impact, but they won't know for several weeks. But there has been such a ruckus raised that there is so much feedback and a pushback starting to come in on this plant that they're going to have another public hearing on August 4th. They've scheduled a second public hearing, so another opportunity to go to Columbus and state the obvious that we shouldn't be building fracked gas plants in 2020 as the planet roasts, that we should be going into wind and solar like so many other places. And then
is this in Ohio they're going to do this too?
Down right smack dab in the middle of Ohio State in the city of Columbus.
Right. The fracking, where's the fracking? Actual fracking is going to happen in Ohio.
Oh, the fracking, they would be using gas from that's been fracked from Southwest Ohio, the area Leatra was talking about earlier.
Because I don't know, I've heard something about us actually being on a fault line, which has been inactive for a long time, but which for all anybody knows could start up again tomorrow. I'm not sure we want to shake things up around there. Maybe that might be the thing that would make the fault line. Remember, it's a fault line.
Well, the fracking and deep well injection and those things are proven to reactivate old fault lines and cause earthquakes. Some places it's quite serious. They've actually destroyed buildings and caused billions in damage just to get a few more million cubic feet of planet-killing gas out of the ground. So, it's bad in so many ways. But one more so that's good news. And then the final good news story I wanted to get in, California has a cap and trade system for carbon. And we can get into the details of cap and trade in the future show. I have some problems with it. It's not the most effective thing, but using it, they did decrease their carbon by 14% from 2004 to 2017. And the Trump administration took California to court because they said, I'm not making this up. This is their actual legal argument. We pulled out of the Paris Accords that said that the U.S. is supposed to reduce its carbon. California doesn't have any right to reduce the carbon because Trump has pulled us out of the Paris Accord, and so no one is allowed to reduce carbon anymore because we pulled out of that treaty. That was their legal argument. And luckily, they've lost. They lost in federal court. And so they get to keep their cap and trade program, and they get to keep their goals. Their goal is 40% carbon reduction by 2030. And they've done some things this past week, which is good to help with that. One is to mandate electric trucks. They said more than half the fleet has to be electric by 2030. So So more good news. So that's all the good news. So what do you think of all this good news that's washing over us today, Rebecca?
It's good. There's been some sort of socio-political, dealing with oppressed people's good news this week, and that's more good news. So the Lord knows we need it right now.
Yeah. You went to something with regards to that, right?
Yeah, well, Thursday night, there was a demonstration in Monroe, Michigan, where they're trying to get rid of the Custer statue, which, Custer was not a nice man. He carried out this policy of bringing the horrors of war to women and children of Native Americans, and it was really, really ugly, and he got his, and for some reason this makes him a hero in some people's eyes.
Well, good luck with that one. And now we're out of time, so thanks for calling, Rebecca, however briefly. So this is Joe DeMare
and Rebecca Wood
signing off.
Bye-bye.